We became independent, fine. Now, when we became independent, there was a kind of ideological vacuum. This vacuum was there because India did not have a strong enough industrial base. The industrialists themselves in the Nagpur and Bombay resolutions in the late 1940s told the government, look, you have to take the initiative. And the government did. We passed the Industrial Policy Resolution in 1948 and the Industry Development and Regulation Act of 1951, where if you produced more, you were punished. So that was the thing. The country doesn't need capacity, they said. We are a democracy, 75 years old, and we seem to value our democracy. Um, I'll start by talking about Bhutan, in fact. In 2007, early 2007, the king of Bhutan took a decision. He said, I want democracy in my country. So people said, Your Majesty, things are very good. Why do you want democracy? He says, because they're good, I want democracy. I'm going to abdicate, and my son will implement the transition. Now, there was a shock because Bhutan was a pristine area, very different from the Indian Himalayas. It was something like what Switzerland was 200 years ago. Absolutely no pollution. The forests came down to the rivers. People wore traditional clothes. There were traditional houses. They had worked on the index of happiness. And very often, people say that India is very full of happy people. Now the reports say India is full of unhappy people. So there's a lot of confusion about this. But generally, one can say that the poorer you are, probably the happier you are if you don't have any aspirations. Because aspirations is what actually brings about unhappiness. And not many of us are at that high spiritual level where we can be happy regardless of the obstacles we face. Now, the king's announcement stirred a hornet's nest. Then the king rang up our Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, and said, please send your election commission chaps over. So the election commission guys went there. They said, okay, now you form political party. You guys form one party, you form another. He said, he's my friend. Why should I oppose him? He said, no, party banao. So they made the parties. Having done that, then the king said that we want a team to come and explain the civil service and democracy. This was led by one of our distinguished colleagues, a senior foreign service officer, Mr. Chinmay Garekhan, and I was a part of his team. So we landed up in Thimphu, called on the king and the prime minister, got our mandate from them, and walked into a classroom a little bigger than this, packed with Bhutan civil servants, senior chaps. All of them had studied in Indian universities, and the majority had got postgraduate degrees from the US. So the audience was very aware. They sent me in first. Maybe I used to open the batting at one point of time, but it was a fairly hostile atmosphere, which is always good. It keeps the adrenaline flowing. So as soon as I entered, they said, are you trying to sell us your corrupt and dysfunctional brand of democracy? So I said, as a matter of fact, yes. I said, please try and understand that democracies evolve. Britain actually became democratic around 1714 or 1715. Forget about the Magna Carta and the intermediate steps. When the King of England could not speak a word of English, so that helped. And the Prime Minister, a very capable chap and a crook of the highest order, Sir Robert Walpole, he took over the government. He created fake constituencies, appointed his friends and relatives to parliament, which is all rigged. So he got the parliament he wanted. He made money hand over fist, but he was a very capable administrator. He was, of course, richer than the king, who not that rich. That's how democracy started. There was corruption in Britain. Two very prominent prime ministers, I won't name them, in the 19th century were again thoroughly corrupt. And now corruption has decreased. Just small things like taking money for parliament questions, a lot of people do that, and minor favors here and there. But gradually it comes within manageable proportions. So that was one example. The other example was the US, where we went to Albany, New York State, And there we were told about the man who developed upstate New York, George Clinton, no relation of Bill. And George Clinton, again, used to auction posts publicly. And this was, the notices were put, how much can you pay? So guys bought their posts. And again, he was a very capable fellow. But systems evolve. Now, are they going to evolve into a kind of utopian system? Far from it. Our democracy is going to grow and become stronger? Far from it. There's what we call natural regression. The default position could be more authority. Today, people attack the BJP government for being authoritarian. They have a point, and the BJP are not alone in this. The Congress set the tone with the emergency, and whenever there's a large majority in parliament, they tend to use the usual suspects, the ED, the CBI, the income tax guys. When you talk to the officers and you ask them, why are you catching these fellows? They say, don't worry, when the government changes, we'll catch the other fellows also. But their belief is that. So ultimately, it is using the machinery, and large majority governments tend to do this. It's not the BJP's monopoly. In fact, they are Johnnies come lately to this game. But whatever it is, democracies, can they regress? Can they end? That's happened in the past. And it's a delicate plant. It requires nurturing. It requires time. So anyway, when they were grilling me, I said, look, it took the British 300 years. It took the Americans 200 years. India is not a mature democracy. We're an evolving democracy. We might call ourselves mature in 2047. I wouldn't be alive to see the day, but you guys will, some of you. So then I said, what are you cribbing about? You've got less social and cultural baggage than we have. You can do it in 50. Now it's evolving. Let us see. The jury is out on how it's doing, but it's probably doing better than a lot of us thought. Now we became independent, and let's bring in some of the drivers now. The write-up talks about 100 years. Let's look at where the world was 100 years ago. In India, you had the Morley-Minto reforms, which was one major step towards Indian participation in governance. World War I and the Spanish flu, which followed the war, decimated millions of people. And therefore, this had actually shaken up a lot of countries. And yet, the economies and the economy of the US began to grow. The US has this marvelous technique of entering the war at the right time, when the hard work has been done by the other guys, both in World War I and World War II. And then the US economy shot up the moment the war was over. Anyway, the major event after the Spanish flu and World War I, and incidentally, World War I led to a lot of things. Most of us know about Versailles and the Alsace and Lorraine, and how Hitler perhaps, grew up in that environment. But don't forget that the Ottoman Empire ended, and it left something of a time bomb in these countries. The war started in Serbia, in fact, in 1914. And as far as the Middle East is concerned, the boundaries, and if you look at your map of the Middle East and the countries, Middle East and North Africa, what you see are straight lines drawn by. Now, these straight lines are there because there were two Sarkari Babus who actually created all these countries. One was, in fact, it was basically one Frenchman and one Englishman, Sykes-Picot. During the war, they said, let's now divide the Middle East among ourselves, the British and the French. For years, the British have been telling the Americans that, look, we guys know the Orient, we understand them, listen to us, we'll guide you. And the Americans fell for this for quite some time. So all these countries were created, and obviously they were looking to their interests, but their interests multiplied manyfold with the discovery of oil in the early 1930s. Then we got into oil politics. But I wouldn't come to the 1930s. Let me come to one of the main events which provides a basis for a major public policy driver, which is the Great Depression. Now, in the 20th century, you already had years of Marxism fine-tuned in the real world, England is a good example because Kaya Hardie came in, he created the Labour Party. So you had a left movement. The right wing, you had your robber barons in the US earlier, but then markets grew, and in the 1920s, they were the roaring 20s, the American economy boomed. Those are good times. And all good times can sometimes come to an end. And 1929 was a shock, which it had to happen, and it wasn't anticipated. Today, the world is wiser. But what happened then was markets collapsed. And when markets collapsed, people realized that capitalism isn't the answer. So they said, okay, let there be government intervention. Fine, Keynes came in Britain, and then you had a case of intellectual cloning because Keynes begat Joan Robinson, who begat a lot of civil servants in the developing world, including Indians. And Nehru himself, being a Fabian socialist, that was a part of the belief. And they believed that socialism is the answer. My father grew up in the 1930s in England. He was a young naval officer, and he was a socialist throughout his life. He died at 99. My maternal grandfather was a member of the Communist Party, also a seditious lawyer and a revenue officer. While his counterpart, my paternal grandfather, believed the best thing that happened to India was the British Empire. So you have different viewpoints. Now, the thing was that I thought socialism was very good. And growing up in post-war Britain, I found I was getting 1 egg a week and 1 bottle of yogurt a week. So I complained to my landlord. He said, son, Mr. Churchill will come back, you'll get your egg and you'll get your yogurt. Mr. Churchill came back, rationing ended. I got my egg, I got my yogurt, I gave up socialism. But the thing is that looking at socialism more seriously, if you look at the ideology, it's the most noble ideology, well thought out, equitable, fair. It takes everything into account except human nature. And therefore, it doesn't work in the real world unless it's buttressed by a brutal dictatorship. Lenin started it, Stalin took it to a new level, Mao came and liquidated millions of his citizens for the cause. And even now, Presidents Putin and, in fact, Xi, they themselves are following the same tradition of absolutism and basically not following socialism at all. The Chinese believe that the Russians made a huge mistake. The central Gorbachevian error was to have glasnost along with perestroika. Now, Deng Xiaoping understood this. He said, let there be no glasnost, let there be perestroika, have a market, but do not allow freedom. This led to the massacre at Tiananmen Square. They were not prepared to tolerate any dissent. So these young people were killed, they were massacred. And then after that, apparently the Chinese sent a delegation to India. And they said, how do you disperse a mob without killing everybody? ये हमारा रोज का काम होता है, लाठी charge and tear gas takes care of most of these. But these guys weren't familiar with these techniques. So basically, it can only work if you have a consensus. Now, if you have a consensus and you follow socialist policies, then there are certain structural inefficiencies because there's no incentive, there's no disincentive, and people tend to steal from the system if they can get away with it. So it's not a perfect system, nor in fact is capitalism for that matter, because when markets collapsed, you had to obviously have state intervention, which helped. FDR's New Deal helped in the US. A lot of your interstates were built at that time. But the only way the Great Recession actually ended was World War II. World War II, or any world war, is a wonderful way of dealing with recession. It also ensures full employment. And people who never worked in their lives start working. Whether it was the Soviet Union, where people worked night and day, whether in our 65 and 71 wars, a lot of our chaps who didn't do much work in the best of times began actually working and producing. So what happens is it can create the atmosphere for a greater effort. So you have these two strands. Britain ultimately became the sick man of Europe. The structural inefficiencies. till the Thatcherite revolution, because the coal union leader Arthur Scargill virtually paralyzed the economy. So they are having their problems, as many countries are. But all these countries have limped along. Now, when we look at the great events of the last century, World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, and World War II also created a momentum for the end of colonialism. So after World War II, you had the end of colonialism and you had the Cold War, which became inevitable again. So the Cold War was there. There was a balance of fear. Nukes were obviously tested and they remained in the background of the Cold War. Then the Cold War ended. The Cold War ended as much by accident as by design. The Berlin Wall fell because every day in East Germany, West German broadcasts were literally transmitted into every home in that country. It was a matter of time before the wall fell. Like a ripe fruit, it just dropped off. And you had one of the most remarkable men of the 20th century who passed away recently. It requires a Gorbachev, who probably comes maybe once or twice a century. So he enabled things to change. But things didn't work well in Russia because these public sector companies, and we used to deal with them and negotiate with them, badly managed, utterly inefficient. And these party chaps who controlled the companies, they became the new mafia. So Putin now, among the richest people in the world, he has good billionaires and bad billionaires, and depending on which side of the divide you are. So that's how the system is. It's not socialist by any chance. The only true socialists, as we tell our friends, are to be found in JNU and Alimuddin Street, and maybe at Pyongyang. But otherwise, there are not too many around. Now, as far as markets are concerned, we'll come to that when we come to the present century. The thing is that now, well, what happened was you had gradually, India set the ball rolling for the British Empire. One by one, countries became independent. The French had a tough time in Algeria. Algerians, I think, they probably lost about nearly 2 million people in their freedom struggle. Whereas we got independence rather easily because the Brits found it was no longer cost effective to hang on to India. It was not a viable proposition. So we got our independence, we had some good people. I have the highest respect for our Constituent Assembly. I think they've given us an excellent document which virtually covers a lot of aspects. They're pretty far-sighted people, and we still owe a debt to them. We became independent, fine. Now, when we became independent, there was a kind of ideological vacuum. This vacuum was there because India did not have a strong enough industrial base. The industrialists themselves in the Nagpur and Bombay resolutions in the late 1940s told the government, look, you have to take the initiative. And the government did. We passed the Industrial Policy Resolution in 1948 and the Industry Development and Regulation Act of 1951, where if you produced more, you were punished. So that was the thing. The country doesn't need capacity, they said. Now, why was this policy created? It was largely created because, like in any organization, the guys who are comfortable don't want newcomers in. And Mr. Ghanshyam Das Birla was in a happy position. He had a lot of sympathetic MPs and officers. And therefore, it was the country has sufficient capacity, you don't need more. Now, if you analyze all the Birla companies, what you'll find is that all of them have negotiated favorable terms for raw material-based industries or location-specific industries. Whether it's Orient Paper, you name it, all these are based on cheap raw materials got through either financial incentives or through connections. So basically, this was it. It was crony capitalism. And I happened to land up in the Ministry of Industry in 1977, Udyog Bhavan. There was a system that a guy in a regulatory ministry goes to an economic ministry. So I came to Udyog Bhavan. On the first day, I came wearing a shiny brown suit. My wife, I was thoroughly embarrassed wearing it, but she said, no, you wear it. So I came in my suit. And I entered the building. I came to the lift. So the lift wala looked at me and he salamed me. So I salamed him. फिर उन्होंने झुक के सलाम किया तो मैंने भी झुक के सलाम किया ये थोड़े इस आदमी से कुछ मिलने वाले नहीं है but that was the system over there corruption from top to bottom the main udyog in Udyog Bhavan was the photocopying for documents after dark and they would copy and then the liaison officer would come and they would say साहब आपने फाइल में क्या लिखा so I said I would have given you a copy in any case he said नहीं मेरा सेठ को चोरी का माल पसंद है So they would literally, it became like a leaking sieve. And the result was corruption, inefficiency, but it harmed the country and the people because we were ended up producing substandard goods at a high price to a captive market. The customers suffered. Now when 1991 happened, no one wanted it. Politicians didn't want it. Bureaucrats didn't want it. Trade unions didn't want it, and academia, with apologies to the colleagues here, the judiciary and the press were in a kind of ideological time warp because that was the conventional wisdom. I used to go into many universities, libraries, and look at the economics textbooks, and they were all in favor of state control. That was the prevailing wisdom. So whatever it was, the fact is that they were reluctant to open up the economy. But what happens is that bankrupt policies lead to bankrupt governments. And the best thing that happened to the government of India was it became bankrupt in 1991. We have a saying in Madhya Pradesh, Kangali ke baad hoshiari. So because we were broke, we began reform. No one wanted reform, but reform came. And then our growth rates increased rapidly. Then we had all these reports on insurance, on banking, on capital account convertibility, and the Narasimhan reports, the two reports on CCA. And the result was that our economy grew at a fairly rapid rate and we were on a high growth path. So ultimately, the systems improvements do come in. Now, ideology, if you look at ideology, you have economic ideology, you have economic fundamentalists, both right-wing and left-wing, you have religious fundamentalists, you have ecological fundamentalists, and of course you have political fundamentalists. But anyone who believes in anything, if you believe in ideology, then you follow what Coleridge calls the willing suspension of disbelief. You stop thinking. An ideology it provide you with an intellectual framework, but it can and does become a substitute for thinking. And as we move into the 21st century, we'll see some illustrations about this. Now, I've rushed you through a number of, let's come to the present century. And let's look at a few other issues here. Now, the main events of the present century, the first was 9/11. Now, having been to Afghanistan twice and had a look at the way the systems work over there, that it was, in a sense, Afghanistan is a unique country, beautiful countryside, very affectionate people, and obviously, it's a diverse country, and yet they were able to carry on till, Zahir Shah left, and when the Russians came in, that started the problem. It triggered the problem. It triggered the problem of the Americans and the Saudis and the Pakistanis coming in, the Russians being driven out. When the Russians left, then the four Mujahideen groups, pushed towards Kabul. But even then, I remember going there with my wife at that time, missiles were coming in. But we could tell if a missile was incoming or outgoing. If it was outgoing, fine. If it's missile coming in, take cover. No big deal. And at the same time, business carries on in wartime as well. So, the place was safe. When I went 20 years later in 2010, I had to move around in an armored vehicle and they wouldn't let me out of the car. I did jump out and have a look at a couple of places I'd been to earlier to buy some nuts, but the thing is that it was very different then. Of course, the place we went to was Babur's tomb. And Babur loved Kabul, but Kabul did not love Babur because they regard him as an interloper. For them, the only true kings are the Ghaznavids, Mahmud and his father Subuktigin. So that was the golden age of Ghazni in the 11th century. It was a very powerful kingdom. But the thing is that the Afghan situation was bad. And yet, because the Taliban took over and things got out of control, the Mujahideen were very good to us. When the Taliban came in, we decided to support Ally Ahmad Shah Massoud. And Massoud was in the Panjshir Valley fighting alone, supported by India, Russia, and Iran. We had a base in Tajikistan, we had a hospital there, we would send people across to Badakhshan. But then, gradually, what happened was that Al Qaeda came into the picture. And when Al Qaeda came, then it was a game changer. And I remember I was watching the first plane hit the Twin Towers and then the second plane. So I turned to my father, I said, the world will never be the same again and India may benefit from this. The Americans came, we offered all help. They said, thank you very much. We'll deal with Pakistan. They told the Pakistanis, either you're with us or you're against us. But the Pakistanis were playing a double game in this. They supported the Americans and they had their own ISI chaps in Kunduz, which is a Pashtun majority city in northern Afghanistan. And then when the Americans were converging on Kunduz, all the warlords came back. Abdul Rashid Dostum came back to Balkh, to Mazar-e-Sharif, and he bumped off all these guys in the Jang-e-Kala or the fort. But whatever it was, the Americans stopped their offensive and they allowed the ISI to take out not only themselves, but to take out a lot of Al-Qaeda people as well. So that happened. Anyway, the rest is all history. Osama was driven out, went later to Abbottabad, and they got him out there. But the thing was that one of the drivers, also now religion becomes an ideology and a belief. Now, if you look and people talk about Islam, they talk about Islamic anger. It's a complicated historical thing. Composite civilizations like India and China were the leading countries in the world, 16th century, 17th century, actually the 16th century, because by then the world had changed. The world had changed because Constantinople was captured by the Ottomans and the trade routes were blocked. So, starting with Prince Henry, the navigator of Portugal, the Europeans got command of the seas. And that led to colonization. So the great age of old civilizations virtually ended in the 16th and definitely by the 17th century. So then the rest is history. The colonies were established, the slave trade was established, all that was there. But coming back to the events of the 21st century, 9/11 was a major game changer, but Afghanistan has been left where it is, as it were. It hasn't changed that much, but the Taliban today are responsible. We need to reach out to them. We need to work with them because they are the people in power. If you look at Iraq, there were no weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein was the modernizer of Iraq. He was, in fact, a Sunni ruling a Shia majority country. He was tough, he was brutal, his sons were more brutal. But whatever it was, that country grew. He was not a fundamentalist. He had no weapons of mass destruction, but the American arms lobby, supply lobby, construction lobby, oil lobby, they virtually engineered, especially the Second Gulf War. The result was that they created Iraq, a new Iraq, and while the Americans also created bin Laden, the Maliki, the second Iraqi president, and the US ambassador created al-Baghdadi also as a counterweight to the Shias. So the result is that these politics don't help us. We created the LTTE, and look where it got us. So, trying to interfere in other countries' businesses doesn't really help in the long run. Whatever it was, in this thing we realize now that you cannot really go in for regime change, even the Americans can't. They're gradually learning to accept the status quo. So that policy, but don't forget that policy capture is the thing I wanted to make. In Vietnam, I had a Vietnamese delegation once, and they were saying the Vietnam War was a victory for the Vietnamese people. I said, yes, it was also a victory for the American people, because the war ended not in Kontum City and Hue. It ended on the fields of Kent State University, Ohio, where the National Guard shot dead students. And then the public realized the government had taken them for a ride. Anyway, that was one aspect. The next great event was the global financial crisis. Now, we learned a lot from this. India escaped the worst effects for broadly three reasons. Our banks were well capitalized, we had a very large home market, and we were insulated from world markets at that time. But the fourth most important thing was black money. Black money it helped us. Black money was a savior for us because the initial blow of the collapsing markets helped us to deal with the situation. The other thing worth mentioning on the global financial crisis is that ideology became irrelevant because most governments, they used Keynesian interventions, they used monetarist interventions. So ideologies today are still relevant as instruments to fine-tune your public policy, but they cannot become a kind of worldview. And when we look at religious ideologies, these become a little more dicey. Now today, the BJP is attacked. They say, no, we're going now. In fact, the current debate is rather vitiated. On the one hand, you have the government spokesman apologists saying that these people are anti-nationals, urban Naxals, traitors, they should be dealt with accordingly. The others say that these chaps are fascists, democracy has been consigned to history, and now it'll be like, the National Socialist Party Mark II. Both are wild exaggerations. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere between. As serious students, we need to analyze individual policies. Now, if you look at the weak points and the strong points of the present government, the weak points become fairly apparent, and that makes them vulnerable. The first, of course, is what is perceived as an anti-minority policy. Obviously, if you want to run a country, it's not just that Akbar and Ashoka and all the rulers, whether it was Krishna Deva Raya, whether it was Sultan Zain al-Abidin in Kashmir, whether it was the Chalukyas, whether it was Rajendra Chola I, all these rulers carried their people with them. You cannot rule a country unless you follow inclusive policies. Are the BJP learning? They are. On the one hand, they have their election juggernaut, so they have to play this card. But I think they're on a learning curve still. They will understand, and the outreach to the Pasmanda Muslims, for example, is where politics may tend to override religion. Because ultimately in a democracy, it is the idea of getting re-elected which is so important. If I'm an elected person, I have a one-point program. I like to make sure I'm re-elected. And right from day one, I'll work towards that. If I'm a politician, now am I a corrupt politician if I collect money for the party? Very difficult to say. I can say I'm an honest politician. I took money, but I passed it on to the party. And I didn't pocket more than 5% or whatever it was. So you have a case of flexible consciences where you adjust to certain ground realities. Now the difference between the UPA and the NDA is quite different because in a coalition, you have a lot of people putting their palms forward. And each ministry was required to collect money for their party. And if the amount exceeded a certain, it would go to the leader of the coalition, as it were. So that led to things like 2G and others. But it was a bit of a scandal. Now what's happened is that in the present system, it's a lot cleaner. Because the ruling dispensation now, people criticize the government, they say, no, Ambani and Adani are running the government. Actually, they aren't. The government runs them. The government tells them what to do because the vision of the government now, and this is a serious government focusing on development. The two weak points, of course, one is communalism and one basically is restriction of freedom, which I believe will be a passing phase, is that They want to strengthen India's industrial base. The role models are those of post-war Japan and the Korean chaebol. That if the government supports Adani and Ambani, they will support Vedanta, they will support the Tatas, they will support Larsen and Toubro, they will support the IT guys, they will support anyone because they want to push the industrial growth of this country. There is a realization that manufacturing becomes critical. People criticize Raghunath Rajan because he says that we should focus on services. He's partly correct. That is our core competence. But certainly we can't neglect production. So you have a situation where these two major events have impacted our policy. The third major event was COVID-19, which I believe, apart from the initial, what should I say, bewilderment of the government and these, workers walking was not, and that was governance failure on our part as well. But after that, it was handled competently, I believe, and a lot more competently than many other countries. And now that is become endemic right now. We learned a lot of lessons. And of course, the Russia-Ukraine war is there. Now that creates very strong headwinds for the government. So in the political debate, what we are seeing is the government being attacked for economic incompetence, which is true up to a point that our rates are lower, but then the kind of economic headwinds we are facing is there. The present government deserves credit for extending its outreach. There are a lot of these schemes which were never really taken up earlier. They adopted UPA's MNREGA, which is always the best safety net you can find. And right now, even things like Swachh Bharat, whether it's providing piped gas, whether it's supporting climate change, all this is extremely, extremely positive. There are many things which are positive and which we need to accept as well. The other thing, of course, which I'd just like to flag is the social sector. Now, what happens is, since I worked in social sector ministries, I would lobby members of parliament and say, look, why don't you guys support me? We're not getting enough money. So then they said, देखिए साहब सीधी सी बात है. Two members of parliament had dropped in. They said, देखो वोट हमें किस चीज़ से मिलता है? हमारा टाइम फ्रेम 5 साल का है. रोटी, कपड़ा, मकान, रोजगार, बिजली, सड़क, पानी, उससे हमको वोट मिलता है. Education, health, climate change, they have no political constituency because these are long gestation, low visibility investments. To be fair to both coalitions, they put their money where their mouth is as regards elementary education. Health, COVID-19 was a wake-up call. But right now, the thing with India is we're at that stage of development where we are bound to grow at faster than most countries because we are at that stage. We have a window. We have a window where we can achieve 6.8, 8 or 9 may be unrealistic, but say 7% growth rates in the next decade or so. We will be overtaken by what will be the fastest growing area in the world, which I believe is Africa. Don't underestimate Africa. Then people talk about population, that a lot of the ruling parties, they're concerned about population. The new secretary of the family of the Ministry of Family Welfare, he dropped in to see me. He said, you're a senior secretary and I've come to you for advice. I said, look, your mandate is to reduce population. He says, yes. I said, you're the head of NACO, which is to discourage AIDS. He says, yes. So I said, your mandate is contradictory. If you want to reduce population, you should promote AIDS. That will knock off many, many people. So that's not practical. So let's leave that out. So he said, kya karna chahiye? So obviously I wasn't going to miss a chance. So then I explained that the population problem is the result of the copulation problem. And therefore what you need to do is to promote same-sex marriages. And that is the only way that you can solve your population problem. But seriously speaking, the fact is that if you take the demographic curves, and a demographic curve normally goes this way. Now, They say that Hindus will be reduced to a minority. Now, that is a little fanciful. Suppose this is the demographic curve for Muslims. The Hindu demographic curve will be similar. You notice that the declining curve would be there. This happens in all countries. India will become the most populous country in the world by 2035, if not earlier. Now they say 2030. When that happens, if we talk about the Hindu and Muslim population, the Muslim population today would be about 15.4% or something. By 2050, it might be 18%, but not more than that, because by then there'll be zero population growth. So this nightmare is actually, it doesn't really exist. It will become a non-issue. One can flag Atmanirbharta, which is important, even though cutting yourself from the world trade is obviously goes against all the principles of international trade. But the defense sector is something we really can't depend on anyone. All these countries, the three South Asian countries, have nukes. There is a kind of balance of power, as it were, and the status quo is there. The Russian war, or Putin's war, may carry on for some time. They will arrive at a face-saving device, probably be the de facto annexation of Luhansk and Donetsk, which in any case are out of the grasp of the Ukrainian government, and Crimea would probably not be disturbed.
I am an urban planner and a LAMP fellow currently. So I heard both of you speaking and Bhargava sir as well. I just have I would like your comment on the fact that you compared India's success to what Britain was 50 years behind, and how we need to focus on manufacturing as a sector. Even though services is important, we need to strengthen our manufacturing sector. Now, going back to Britain and the England, the industrial revolution happened and the cities were in havoc completely, and then they brought all the city beautiful movement and they focused majorly on their city development. Now, given the construct that England had at that time, they had the money, they had the space, and they did not have the problem of population that currently India as a country has. If we look at other countries with that population aspect, if we look at China is already struggling with the idea of population completely. If we look at America or Canada or the other developed nation, they are already highest carbon emitters in the country. So is India ready on that aspect? If we are focusing on manufacturing right now, are we ready, especially with our cities, to handle that kind of the pressure that will come on the resources as a whole?
Baswan sir, please.
Is that manufacturing, we were Johnnies come lately when it came to manufacturing. We may have, a certain advantage in certain products, not in others. So manufacturing across the board is not really easy. We have the resources, steel-based industries is just one example of that. And as far as the environment is concerned, you see, urban areas, by and large, the industrial policy keeps these factories a little far away from urban areas. The problem is that urban development has not been a priority in India. The reason is that if I'm a chief minister, I depend on my MLAs, and I'm in power largely because of them. So they tell me what to do, and very often I do that. Now, MLA will not tolerate either a Zilla Panchayat or a municipality, because that becomes an alternative power center. Legislators today have power without responsibility. If I'm an MLA, suppose I'm corrupt, then what happens is that I make money through transfers, and as a middleman I operate. So therefore I will not share power with the Zilla Panchayat or with the municipality. I will speak to the chief minister, and the elected body will be thrown out, and an administrator will listen to the CM, will be appointed. So urban development, local development does not have a strong political constituency, because this falls under the directive principles of state policy, and therefore it's not mandatory. In the West, it's different because the cities grew organically through the guilds in the Middle Ages. So they had London had a Lord Mayor, I think, right since the 13th century. So what happens is these systems evolve. We never had that system at all. But as far as better technologies are concerned, yes, we have better, carbon precipitation devices. We can have a greener technology.
Right.
Yes.
My question is to Baswan sir. It's so nice that we have the benefit of his talk so soon after Diwali. I know personally that he doesn't prefer to be in Delhi so soon after Diwali because of the pollution, but I think this year it has been better. But sir, I would like to take you back to a couple of your compatriots and predecessors, Mr. Shankaran and Mr. Appu, for example. I mean, Mr. Appu said that India is a Rolls-Royce economy going along with a bullock cart administration. That was one of his quips. And Mr. Shankaran, who sort of said, let's flip this, let's have our senior most bureaucrats in the district, and let's have the youngsters doing policy at the secretariat. My question to you is, and there has been some research recently, sir, from Kellogg's and all, which says, for example, that bureaucrats have an important role to play in implementation. My question to you, sir, and your thoughts on this is, is it broken, you think, or do you think the bullock cart bureaucracy has moved on and we can do better?
बासवान साहब, बुलक कार्ट और एरोप्लेन दोनों एक साथ हिंदुस्तान में चल सकते हैं नहीं, बताइए प्लीज.
I've gone for a meeting with the secretary in the state. We had a meeting in a village in Bilaspur district. So we flew to Raipur in a jet plane. We took an air-conditioned coach to Pendra Road. Then, and not an air-conditioned coach, an ordinary first class. Then from there, we went in a jeep, and the jeep conked out. We traveled for about 8 miles in a bullock cart. So what happens is that coexistence of all of these does exist, but at a more serious level, let me say that structural inefficiencies continue to plague us. We are not competitive in many sectors. We can't compete, and therefore choose the sectors where you have a competitive, going back to Ricardo, where you have an advantage, focus on that. Don't be over-ambitious. Don't try and develop certain industries where you're uncompetitive because you'll create white elephants. The public sector will gradually be confined to history, and not many tears will be shed for them.